Story 1. If God's obedience test to Abraham happened today, where he heard voices in his head telling him to kill his son Isaac in a sacrifice, he would rightfully be institutionalized for schizophrenia. Story 2. The story where the children were bothering the man with the bald head, so he prayed to God, and God sent a bear to attack the children. Story 3. Abraham worked. The flooding of the entire earth and the drowning of every man, woman, and child except for one family is one of the most disturbing stories that appears in children's coloring books. Story 4. I identify as a Christian, though I have some ambivalence. Now, let me share a story from the book of Judges, chapter 19. A Levite travels to Gibeah with his concubine. While staying overnight at an acquaintance's home, a mob of men gathers outside and demands that the Levite be handed over to them for assault. To prevent this heinous act, the Levite and his host force his concubine out the door, and she suffers a tragic fate. In response to this atrocity, the Levite dismembers her and sends 12 pieces to the tribes of Israel, excluding the tribe of Benjamin. This action serves to inform the tribes of the horrific crime committed by the men of Gibeah. Subsequently, the other tribes surround Gibeah, which belongs to the tribe of Benjamin, and take severe action against them. Story 5. When Lot offers his daughters to the crowd of the town to be harmed, he is then praised for his obedience to God. Story 6. Job for me. God has a competition with the devil to prove that a man has true faith by slaughtering his family and farm. To me, the devil won that argument because he got God to do it. He is God. He doesn't have to prove anything. Story 7. In 1 Samuel 15, God orders Saul to destroy the Amalekites. Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they ambushed them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites and completely destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. When Saul failed to kill everything, sparing the cattle, he was stripped of his title as king. Story 8. The 10 Plagues. Pharaoh is ready to let the slaves go after the third plague. But God forcibly changes Pharaoh's mind and compels him to keep the Israelites in Egypt repeatedly. Every evening, Pharaoh thinks, this is really unsettling. I need to get these slaves and their strange God out of here. But God immediately compels Pharaoh to endure. This is not just about Pharaoh doing what God wants. God wants to emphasize that he is the only God worthy of worship and that the Egyptians made the wrong choice. God will compel you to witness the suffering of your children to make that point. There is no backing out early, no matter how much you want to. God will manipulate you into sticking with his troubling plan. It's honestly quite unsettling in retrospect. Story 9. The story of original sin is disturbing. God knew they would eat the apple, then punished them and all of mankind for it. If eating the apple allowed Eve to tell the difference between good and evil, then she had no understanding that what she was doing was wrong and was still punished. As others have noted, almost any part of the Bible, when examined in any modern translation, is troubling. Even some of the original meanings were problematic. However, each translation has made it worse. Story 10. After King David sleeps with Bathsheba and kills her husband, God punishes him by having his own son enact a coup and violate all of David's wives on the palace roof for the whole city to see. Story 11. The actual Handmaid's Tale, the story of Bilhah, is quite disturbing. She is Leah's servant who is given to Leah's husband to conceive and bear children. Then, Leah takes Bilhah's babies and claims them as her own. We are expected to view this as admirable. Story 12. The Adam and Eve story and the concept of the fall of man are disturbing to me. The idea that all of humanity's suffering stems from learning is troubling. As soon as they understand the concepts of good and evil, which represents the pursuit of knowledge, they are doomed for all eternity. The lesson suggests that one should live in ignorant bliss, and that learning about the real world leads to downfall. A more comprehensive view is that the entirety of the Old Testament is unsettling, while the New Testament contains some valuable moral teachings. I like your Christ, I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ. Mahatma Gandhi. Story 13, tough call, but I always give it to Job. Imagine having such absolute faith in God, only for God to allow your life to become a living hell just so he can win a bet with the devil. I'm sorry, Christians, but the devil won that bet by proving that for all of man's loyalty to God, God has no such loyalty in return. Story 14. As a teenage Jew in Hebrew school, it was the Exodus that turned me off the whole experience. Pharaoh at numerous points seemed to acknowledge that the God of the Israelites made some compelling and dangerous arguments, but he was still told to let them go. Then God hardened his heart and made him change his mind. Cue teenage me thinking, this is unfair. It seemed like God got what he wanted but chose to prolong the suffering on both sides. No, I'm done. Story 15. Here's a list I keep handy for questions like these. Priests inducing an abortion with a special potion that only works if she has cheated. Numbers 5:11-31. A protagonist offers his daughters to a crowd of rapists. Genesis 19 verse 5. An explanation of the proper procedure for selling your own daughter into slavery. Exodus 21 verses 7-11. A woman mutilates her son's genitals with a rock to make a point. Exodus 4 verse 25. A mother expresses her feelings about your children with a harsh sentiment. Psalm 137 verse 9. A king demands that a suitor for his daughter provide the foreskins of 100 men, which the suitor chooses to double down on for amusement. 1 Samuel 18 verses 20-30. Solomon includes explicit content in his writings, discussing intimate encounters in his garden. Song of Solomon 113, verse 16, 5:4, 7:3, 7:7, 8:10. Solomon further discusses intimate topics. Proverbs 5 verse 19. Ezekiel critiques women using gold for inappropriate purposes. Ezekiel 16 verse 17. Moses declares that if two men are fighting and one of their wives intervenes and grabs the other man's genitals, her hand should be cut off, indicating this was a common occurrence that required regulation. Deuteronomy 25 verses 11-12. Samson visits a woman of ill repute. Judges 16 verse 1. God punishes a man for withdrawing during intercourse, as he did not wish to impregnate his widowed sister. Genesis 38 verses 9-10. Judah neglects the same widowed daughter-in-law so severely that she disguises herself as a prostitute, resulting in her becoming pregnant. Genesis 38 verses 15-18. Reuben engages with one of his father's concubines. Genesis 35 verse 22. Lot's daughters intoxicate him and take advantage of him. Genesis 19 verses 33-36. Judah has relations with an unknown woman. Genesis 38 verse 2. Amnon assaults his sister Tamar. 2 Samuel 13 verses 11-14. Isaiah discusses horrific acts against women and children. Isaiah 13 verse 16. David has relations with a woman and arranges for her husband's death to marry her. 2 Samuel 12 verses 2-27. David's son Absalom publicly shames his father by having relations with his father's concubines. 2 Samuel 16 verses 21-22. Elisha, having received a double portion of Elijah's spirit, reacts harshly to taunts about his baldness, leading to the death of children through a bear attack. 2 Kings 2 verses 23-24. Ezekiel describes a woman's sexual exploits in a graphic manner. Ezekiel 23 verses 18-21. The most disturbing account involves a protagonist offering his concubine to be gang-raped, leading to her death from abuse. Her body is cut into 12 pieces and sent with a letter to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Judges 19. As a bonus, the subject of witchcraft is also mentioned. 1 Samuel 28 verses 2-25. Story 16. Job bothers me. The destruction of everything he cares about, coupled with the confidence that he would still praise God, is chilling. Why would I ever want to believe in a God like that? Story 17. Oh, I know exactly how to answer that. Jephthah made a vow to the Lord. If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Then Jephthah went over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns from Aroer to the vicinity of Minnith, as far as Abel Keramim. Thus Israel subdued Ammon. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of timbrels? She was his only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "Oh no, my daughter! You have brought me down, and I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." A general made a vow to God to sacrifice as a burnt offering whatever came out of his door first to greet him when he returned triumphant from battle. It was his daughter. Story 18. King Saul demands a bag of foreign foreskins for his daughter in marriage. David proceeds to kill 200 men, 100 for the foreskins and presumably another 100 for amusement. A courtier in King Saul's court is now tasked with counting out 100 bloody foreskins that had been marinating in a sack across the desert heat for days. This act won over the princess's heart. King Saul, now with a bag of foreskins and one less daughter, realizes that God supports David and proceeds to resent his new son-in-law for life. Story 19. The story of Lot. Two angels are threatened with violence, so instead, Lot allows his daughters to be assaulted in their place. He then leaves the town, and he and his family are presumed to be the only ones spared from God's wrath. However, his wife is turned into salt for glancing back at the city. Lot and his daughters eventually settle down elsewhere. When he becomes intoxicated, his daughters assault him, resulting in their pregnancies. Their descendants later become the nations of Ammon and Moab. These two groups from the Bible are a consequence of the actions of Lot's daughters, who assaulted their father after he had previously offered them to be harmed in place of two strangers he had just met. Rather than punishing any of these three, God punishes the wife who looked back at the city he was destroying. Just why? Story 20. There was Adam and there was Eve. They had two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel. Cain was given a mark so that everyone in the nearby city would recognize him as a murderer, even though this was the first murder. Somehow, all other humans descended from Adam and Eve. I was not fully awake when I typed this and I mixed up the names. Yes, Cain had the mark and Abel was dead. I misspoke. Story 21. Ehud attempted to kill the king of Moab, Eglon, by stabbing him with a sword, but Eglon was so obese that his fat enveloped the entire sword, including the hilt. Story 22. Many daughters get their father drunk after their mother is turned into a pillar of salt and commit incest so they can bear sons to inherit his property when he dies. Only sons inherit their father's belongings during that time. Story 23. The story of a group of kids who taunt and insult a bald-headed man. God does not support this behavior, so he sends two bears to maul to death the 42 children involved. Story 24. As a Christian, I find the story of Lot's family particularly unsettling. This discomfort arises because modern religious politicians often use this story to demonize gay people, which is not what the story is about. In summary, God notices that two cities have become terrible places filled with evil people and decides to destroy them. However, he wants to send angels to rescue Lot and his family because they are the most righteous individuals. Knock knock. Lot. Who is it? Angels. Angels. Lot. Come in. Let me get you some tea or something. Angels. God is going to destroy the city because it is beyond repair, but he cares for you and your family, so we need to leave. Lot. Let's negotiate. If you can find 20 righteous people, maybe you won't destroy the cities. Angels. Okay. Lot, how about 10 righteous people? Or maybe 5. Knock knock. Lot. Who is it? Townspeople. Hey, Lot, we saw some really attractive men go into your house. Send them out so we can have a good time. Lot. Oh no. Those are angels. Townspeople. Well, we've never had angels before, so send them out. It's time for some fun. Lot, the only righteous man in the cities. I have a daughter. You can take her instead. Angels. Seriously? Nuclear launch detected. By itself, the story is disturbing, but the way people thousands of years later use it to persecute gay individuals is even more troubling. On a different note, my favorite story in the Bible is about Simeon. Narrator: There was a man named Simeon who was very old because he was promised he would not die until he met Jesus. He is at the temple right now. Mary and Joseph have brought baby Jesus to the temple. Baby Messiah noises. Simeon looking over his spectacles. Is that? No way. Simeon jumps up, his stone crossword flying, all his joints cracking. Simeon, give me that baby. Simeon dances around with Jesus, despite his arthritis. Simeon, I found him. I found him. Yes, Lord, you promised. I am ready to leave this world. Let's go. Story 25. Matthew 2 verses 16 to 18. When King Herod heard that the wise men had deceived him and did not return to inform him of the location of the Christ child, he sent his men to the city and region of Bethlehem and killed all the baby boys aged 2 and younger. Imagine what that looked like. That is part of the Christmas story. Story 26. The man allowed his concubine to be raped to death by the men of the town, then chopped up her body and delivered the pieces to different cities as a protest of how he was treated. Alternatively, Dinah was blamed for being raped by her friend's brother. Story 27. This individual decides to create life and grants them intelligence and curiosity, but forbids them from eating an apple for fear they may become like him. A talking snake convinces them to eat the apple. In his anger, he condemns them to die, but not immediately, in about 900 years. He subsequently drowns every living being on the planet except for a few pairs of magical kangaroos that hop all the way from Australia to Jerusalem and back, narrowing the gene pool. He then decides the only way to protect the people of Earth from his own anger over the apple is to sacrifice himself on a tree to himself and return in a few days. Being an omniscient being, he knows this story's interpretations will lead to centuries of genocide, war, and oppression without a shred of proof any of it is true. This is unsettling. It suggests that we are at the mercy of a delusional, genocidal maniac with mood swings. Unless, of course, it's all just nonsense. Story 28. The Levite Concubine. I believe it's in the book of Judges. It has been a while since I learned about the story in college about 10 years ago. Basically, she leaves her husband. He goes to retrieve her. They end up in a city where everyone, except one man, treats them poorly. The man takes them in for the night. While there, the men of the city come to the Good Samaritan's door, demanding he provide the husband for them to harm. Instead, they release the concubine to the men. She is abused throughout the night and dies in the morning. The husband cuts her into pieces and sends them to different kingdoms to demonstrate the depravity in the city. I have had conversations about this story with devoted Christians who, at first, never believed me that there is a story like this in the Bible. I have them look it up and read it, and they are, without fail, dumbfounded. Story 29. The Teachings of the Rapture. Growing up in a Christian school prior to the 3rd grade, I was taught that at any moment the rapture would occur. If I hadn't prayed hard enough recently, I would be left behind alone in the ruins of the world while everyone else got to go live freely in heaven. That's a troubling thing to tell a child. At any moment, if I wasn't actively seeking forgiveness, God would take my family and leave me behind to struggle alone. It certainly didn't help that my family isn't Christian. So the message I received was more like, if you don't pray enough to save your whole family, you'll be taken from them and have to watch them perish during the apocalypse from heaven. Story 30. Oh, God said to Abraham, "Kill me a son." Abraham replied, "Man, you must be putting me on." God said, "No." Abraham responded, "What?" God said, "You can do what you want, Abraham, but the next time you see me coming, you better run." Well, Abraham asked, "Where do you want this killing done?" God said, "Out on Highway 61. Story 31. The one where God commands the Israelites to commit genocide against an enemy. Their sin was living in a place the Israelites wanted to inhabit. Why build your own city when you can simply take one? In the command to commit genocide, there is specific language where God directs, kill everyone. Not just men, but women and children, the elderly and babies. Murder them all. Story 32. For me, it's the time the Israelites questioned Moses and God about why they were wandering aimlessly in a desert for years if they were his chosen people. In response, he sent lethal poisonous snakes to bite them. After many deaths, they apologized to God for ever questioning his decisions, such as sending poisonous snakes for asking a question about their nightmare situation. In response, God provided them with a bronze standard featuring a snake that stopped them from dying of the poison. They still got bitten, and the snakes were still present. That didn't stop. I'm pretty sure those Israelites are also the ones God wanted to kill an entire generation of while they spent decades lost in inhospitable territory, so it was a pretty relevant question. I come from a psychology background, not Christianity, and this is cartoonishly abusive behavior. The moral seems to be that God can do whatever terrible things he wants to you, and not only are those terrible things your fault, but you are wrong for even questioning it and should be punished by pain and death for your audacity. It's beyond authoritarian. Insane dictators wish they could achieve this level of blind obedience after harming their own people, yet it rarely works out like that. Healthy humans do not treat people they care about this way. Anyone who does would be labeled a psychopath or narcissist and considered dangerous and unfit to have free reign among the populace. But when God does it, it's viewed as right and just. We don't judge him by human standards when he commits acts of genocide, but we bring out those standards when we discuss how awesome God is for creating and loving a species he has inflicted multiple atrocities against, including near-total genocide. It's disturbing. Story 33. The mass murder of the world via the flood is difficult to surpass. There are also instances where the Israelites were commanded to eliminate a neighboring tribe, including all the men, all the boys, and all the women who had ever known a man, sparing only the virgin girls. Additionally, there are divine rules regarding the proper treatment of other humans as slaves, including methods to persuade men to voluntarily submit to lifelong slavery or risk losing their wives and children. Story 34. Not being aware of many Bible stories, the one that comes to mind is the plagues of Egypt. While demonstrating God's power, the plagues inflict terrible suffering and death upon the Egyptians, including the death of all the firstborn sons. And for what? Just to demonstrate his power. Story 35. Not a story, but unsettling conclusions about the 10 Commandments. Do not lie. Saying, "I'm okay," is sinful when someone asks about my day, but I don't want to waste time or burden them with my problems. Do not steal. This is good in principle, just like the rule against lying, but I won't criticize someone who has to steal essentials to survive. In terms of having space for 10 absolute rules, this feels like filler. Do not cheat on your spouse, and do not fantasize about other people's spouses. These 2 commandments make up 20% of the list focused on marital fidelity. Did they reach 10 and realize they had no room left, just dropping others into the suggestion box? For example, 1. You shall not have slaves. You shall not rape. You shall not traffic children or people in general. You shall not torture. I believe these are much more important and inexcusable rules than do not lie, do not steal, and do not think about your neighbor's spouse. Story 36. All the messages telling women to be silent, to sleep with their fathers or brothers, and not to seek agency or autonomy for fear of being condemned to eternal damnation are manipulative and harmful. I empathize with the Christian women who do not want to live this way but feel paralyzed by what they perceive as the only alternative. Story 37. The rape of Tamar. The poor girl was never the same. The assault resulted in the death of the perpetrator at the hands of her brother, Absalom. He went on to challenge his father, King David, for the throne of Israel, leading to a bloody civil war and Absalom's death at the hands of one of King David's nephews. This may be the only reference to a moment of clarity following a traumatic event in the Bible. Story 38. The Tower of Babel tells the story of a righteous God who understands that it would be physically impossible for humans to build a tower that reaches the heavens. In his anger toward humanity, he decides to make us speak different languages, which leads to division, conflict, and the breakdown of human collaboration. Is this supposed to be a good story about respecting God and not challenging him? Am I supposed to like this figure more after all that? Story 39. Ex-Christian here. Among the many stories mentioned, the account of Judas Iscariot shook my faith the most. John 17 is one of my favorite passages from the New Testament, but it has always bothered me that Judas, widely considered to be the son of destruction, referenced in verse 17, essentially existed to fulfill prophecy by betraying Jesus and thus be damned. Predestination has always disturbed me. Why would God create people who will never choose him in his own image, no less? How can any Christian reconcile valuing life with following a doctrine that results in most people being damned? If God exists, he cannot possibly be loving, and for having lied about it, he cannot be good. Story 40. There is a story in a book by Isaday, specifically verses 9 to 13. In this section, the book describes how rape should be punished. However, it does not punish the perpetrator. Instead, it punishes the victim. This section states that the offender owes the victim's father a price for the lost property and must marry the victim as a form of punishment. This situation is deeply troubling in ways that are difficult to convey. Story 41. The Curse of the Illegitimate Child. If you are like me with a similar life experience, growing up as an illegitimate child in a Christian family, it had a significant impact on me and made me see myself as a pariah and the black sheep of the family. Story 42. I am unsettled by the story of Onan and his sister-in-law. It is uncomfortable and disturbing. It doesn't help that I read it when I was in 3rd grade. People from the church sneak into our elementary school to leave Bible and other books in our classroom. We are a very secular country with a small Christian population, so our teachers simply place them on the bookshelves, thinking they are just stories about religion. The story of Job makes me feel terrible for him. I was very angry that no one is going to hold God and Satan accountable and revive his children. However, I find this line beautiful. I need to look it up in English. If I remember correctly, it was from Job 14. Mortals born of woman are a few days and full of trouble. They spring up like flowers and wither away. Like fleeting shadows, they do not endure. Story 43. The scenario where God tests people's faith by allowing Satan to run for president to see if they will vote for him, and they do. Story 44. I have always found it perplexing that God was angered by Eve's one act of disobedience. He decided that the appropriate punishment would be for every female mammal, for all eternity, to suffer through menstruation each month. Who can look at this and think that this figure is admirable? Story 45. Off the top of my head, probably the one where God says, "Forget those children," and sends a grizzly bear to maul a group of kids to death all because they made fun of a man for being bald. Also, Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane always felt troubling as a child because it seems like Jesus wasn't fully aware of the whole crucifixion part of the prophecy. He appears to be understandably anxious about it, begging his Father not to allow his horrific death to happen. If you were God, why not just snap your fingers and forgive everyone? Why let your son be nailed to a cross? It makes you seem like a total drama queen. Story 46. There are certainly many troubling aspects to consider. One of the most horrifying elements occurs right at the beginning but often goes unnoticed. The serpent deceives Eve, who eats the fruit. Because of this deception, God punishes all of humanity for all time. Let's reflect on the events that unfold. 1. An all-knowing God leaves a trap and simply says, "Don't touch it. You will die." A human who has never encountered deception is lied to. A naive human commits a mostly innocent act. All of humanity is punished indefinitely. What kind of neglectful authority leaves a hot stove within reach of a young child without proper safeguards? What kind of immoral power punishes an innocent child for something they have never experienced, especially for something another seemingly more experienced being assured them was permissible? What kind of parent permits a serpent in their home, knowing the potential problems it could cause, and fails to warn their child of its presence? What kind of parent declares an innocent act as irrevocably damning across generations? The story of the Garden of Eden resembles a horror tale about a sadistic jailer. Story 47. I grew up attending Christian school for 12 years and church every day. I could share many unsettling stories from the Bible, but one that always impacted me is the story of Job. For those who are unaware, the book of Job involves a challenge between the devil and God regarding whether the devil could make Job turn against God. God asserts that Job would never do so. The devil then asks God for permission to test Job. First, he takes away Job's wealth, destroying his crops and cattle, resulting in Job losing everything. When that fails, God allows the devil to kill Job's servants and children. Despite this, Job does not turn against God. He remains faithful. Eventually, he is blessed with even greater riches, servants, and children than he had before. This story is often interpreted as a demonstration that God will bless those who remain faithful during difficult times. However, I see it as a story about how God allowed many to die just to win a challenge. The new children seem to be mere replacements for those who died, and the lives of the servants appear to hold little significance, as Job receives more. I have always found this story horrifying. It does not reflect God's goodness and blessings. Rather, it illustrates how little our lives seem to matter to this great and powerful deity, willing to sacrifice so many for a wager to prove the devil wrong. Story 48. Basically, everything that happened in the Bible was centered around the Middle East with some involvement from Egypt. No wonder that place is really troubled even today. Story 49. In 2 Kings 2 verses 23 to 24, Elijah became angry when some children called him bald. He cursed them, and 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the children. Story 50. The story of Job is quite horrific. God, look, here is my most faithful follower. I bet you can't make him curse my name. Satan. All right, I will take everything he loves and kill everyone close to him. God, go ahead. God then rewards him by giving him a new family and livestock, as if that resolves the trauma that God allowed to be inflicted upon Job due to his own insatiable ego. Story 51. It would have to be God telling Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, and Abraham following through. It's all the negative aspects of religion in one story. Unyielding fanaticism can lead directly to atrocity. Consider most wars being fought in the world today: Israel and Palestine, India and Pakistan, Yemen. Catholics and Protestants have spent several centuries throughout history trying to convert each other, often with deadly consequences. Let's not even begin to address how many times the Jewish people have faced violence and persecution. All of that is based on this one story. If God tells you to kill, you kill. There is no one more dangerous than a true believer. Story 52. The Old Testament contains a variety of disturbing stories. God sends bears and lions to kill children who mocked an old man for being bald, decides that humanity is too sinful and floods the entire world, and repeatedly hardens the Pharaoh's heart when he is close to being swayed by Moses to free the Israelites. Simeon and Levi slaughter all the men in Shechem while they are recovering from circumcision. This list could go on. However, in my opinion, the most unsettling aspect of the Christian Bible is the epistles. Much of Paul of Tarsus's writing contradicts the essence of Jesus' teachings. Jesus, love your neighbor. Your enemy is also your neighbor. Don't show off by praying in public, and I will heal the centurion's servant. Paul, women should remain silent in church. Story 53. Not directly from the Bible, but during catechism, I asked why Jesus went to hell after he died and what he was doing there for 3 days. I was told by the pastor that he was freeing the people who had gone to hell because Jesus hadn't been born yet. The idea was that no one enters the kingdom of heaven but through me meant that for thousands of years, all those people went to hell because they didn't believe in Jesus as their Messiah, as he didn't exist yet. That was the end for me. Story 54. The test for your wife's faithfulness. If you suspect your wife has been unfaithful, you take her to the temple where specific words are written on a scroll. The words are then rinsed off in water with dust from the floor, and the wife drinks it. If her abdomen swells and she miscarries, then she was unfaithful. If you think your wife has been unfaithful, you give her contaminated water, and if she has a miscarriage, then you were right. Note, I often think about this when people say that God is against abortion. There are no anti-abortion verses in the Bible, but there are instructions on how to perform one. Story 55. Just God's jealousy, pettiness, and rage. It openly states he is a jealous God and constantly engages in petty, prove you love me antics and mindlessly listen because I'm smarter than you tests. And if you don't, you'll suffer for eternity. It doesn't sound like an entity I want making decisions for me. In Catholicism, we are taught to fear God. I was surprised as an adult to find out that other sects follow him for love rather than just out of fear for their eternal soul. I'm agnostic now. Story 56. The Tower of Babel has always seemed to me like a story of a cowardly god ensuring that people can never work together efficiently enough to threaten its control. This, to me, is just one of many acknowledgments that the war god YHWH's power is not as omnipotent as its followers would claim. Story 57. God striking down Uzzah for touching the ark never sat well with me. He was just trying to stabilize it over rough terrain. Story 58. And Cain knew his wife. Cain had relations with a woman who is not mentioned in the biblical text. In the beginning, there were Adam and Eve who had two sons, Cain and Abel. After Cain killed Abel, he left his home and encountered a woman. Where did she come from? If he had waited for a younger sister to marry, that might explain some of the mental health issues in later generations. Incest rarely leads to positive outcomes for anyone. Story 59. God hardened the heart of the Pharaoh, resulting in many firstborns dying unnecessarily. He had the power to part the Red Sea but waited years while his people were enslaved. Why couldn't he free them from the beginning, given his unlimited power? He also allowed Herod to kill every boy under 2 years old. He could have stopped it, couldn't he? Story 60. The Book of Job, no doubt. Satan says to God, "People only really love you because you are kind to them. If you treated someone poorly, they wouldn't care for you at all." God responds, "Bet," and looks at Job, one of his most loyal followers. He kills several members of Job's family, ruins his business, and disfigures his face with horrible boils. To the shock of no one, Job begins to doubt his belief in God, and his friends tell him that God must not care much for him and that he should stop believing. Then God comes down, and rather than being kind and loving to Job or apologizing for taking this test too far, he chastises Job for being disloyal and not blindly trusting that he knows what he is doing. He then goes on a rant about how he has so much work to do as God sees everything, and that Job should just stop complaining. Technically, he does let Job go with a warning while making his friends perform sacrifices and have Job pray for their sake, and he gives him a new family and business. I don't know why I would worship a God who seems so petty and unkind. Story 61. God dislikes shrimp. They are unclean for you. Story 62. Lot offered his daughters to be harmed in Genesis 19 verses 1 to 11. Two men, who were actually angels, appeared in Sodom where Lot lived with his family. The wicked men of the city surrounded Lot's house seeking to have inappropriate relations with the angels. Lot pleaded with the men not to commit this evil act and instead offered his two virgin daughters to them. Story 63. Job was a good man who loved God, his family, and others. So God decided to test him. Story 64. Israeli invasions of the areas they believed were the promised land resulted in significant loss of life and destruction under the guise of God's promise. Story 65. Cain and Abel. I first heard that story when I was about 8 years old. It really disturbed me. How can someone kill their own sibling? I have a sister and could never do that to her or anyone else. So wrong. Story 66. Surprised no one has mentioned the origin of circumcision. God made a covenant with Abraham, promising to bless his over 100-year-old wife with a child if Abraham removed the foreskins of all the men in his household. The idea of mandating genital mutilation in exchange for a child is quite extreme. This also led to Abraham and Sarah casting out Hagar and Ishmael. Sarah insisted that Abraham have a son with his slave because she could not bear children. Once she had Isaac, she demanded that both Hagar and Ishmael be sent away. This event marks the canonical split between Jews and Arabs, with Jews being the descendants of Isaac and Arabs being the descendants of Ishmael. Story 67. The Book of Revelation almost makes me want to convert, although I am already on that path. Given the confirmed historicity of Christ and the miracles, I think, what if it is true? I am both in awe and terrified. Story 68. The binding of Isaac is quite thought-provoking. A man is fully prepared to sacrifice his own son, and he is rewarded by being allowed to keep him. Imagine being Isaac in that scenario, being allowed to stay with your father after he was about to harm you moments ago. While Christianity emphasizes faith, it would be more impactful if Abraham had refused to give up his son, and was rewarded for adhering to his morals instead of blindly following orders. Story 69, Korah's Rebellion, the Binding of Isaac, the Flood and the Ark, Sodom and Gomorrah, the Plagues of Egypt, the Slaughter of the Amalekites, Jephthah's Daughter, the Elisha and the Bears, the Witch of Endor, the Levite's Concubine. God sends a lying spirit to Ahab. The angel of death kills 185,000. These examples highlight unsettling themes in the Bible. While these acts are often framed as holy, they can appear disturbing and lacking in empathy for those affected. Story 70. The story is about a man who initially starts a cannibal cult by allowing his followers to consume his own flesh and later returns as a zombie. Story 71. The story of Samson's wedding is intense. He loses a bet, and because he cannot pay up, he attacks 30 people and takes their clothes. Story 72. When God was so unforgiving that he punished a woman for looking back at the city he was destroying, it highlights his harshness. God could be seen as overly sensitive and committed the first sin in the scripture. Story 73. It is difficult to choose, given all the instances of rape, incest, 2 Samuel 13, slavery, Deuteronomy 21 verses 10 to 14, and the deity demanding the murder of infants, 1 Samuel 15. Story 74. David collected foreskins from fallen soldiers after defeating Goliath and used them as currency to purchase a wife. Story 75. I am a Christian, and this is what ought to scare you. Matthew 7 verses 21 to 23 states, Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name? And then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Story 76. I like the story where they convince the tribe to all get circumcised to marry the daughter, and then proceed to slaughter the entire tribe after they tried to accommodate the Christian views for the marriage. My second favorite unsettling story is about trying to help the Christians conquer lands. Yet the all-powerful God couldn't defeat one group due to iron chariots. They believe he can smite and create worlds, heal all sickness, and overcome death itself, but the power stops at iron. Judges 1 verse 19. Story 77. I always found the God of Israel ordering the genocide of every Amalekite man, woman, and child, along with their animals, disturbing. I later heard that Hebrew folklore claimed they were shapeshifters, which is why they all had to die. Story 78. Abraham took Isaac to a mountaintop because the voices in his head, which they call God in the Bible, told him he had to sacrifice him. Fortunately, the voices changed their mind at the last minute. Story 79. The Bible only mentions abortion once and provides instructions on how to perform one. I find it unsettling how many Christians forget this fact when they campaign for pro-life views. Story 80. Are you telling me that some almighty God has an ego so large that he refuses to be negatively attributed, and that anyone who so much as says he is anything but divine will be thrown into hell? For a big man, he sure is pedantic and weak. Yet if I want the same treatment, people would judge me and call me needy, egotistical, low self-esteem, clingy, or narcissistic. Even if God does exist, a deity that willingly allows injustice to exist and looks down from a golden throne is just as bad, if not worse, than those people. I refuse to submit to or pray to a God that permits these occurrences without showing any concern. Story 81. Not the worst, but I always found the story of Uzzah really harsh. Only certain people could touch the Ark of the Covenant. When the oxen pulling the cart stumbled, Uzzah reached out to stop the ark from falling, and God struck him dead on the spot. The poor man was just trying to help. Story 82. In the Old Testament, God displays signs of borderline personality disorder. He reacts to perceived abandonment with anger, exercises abusive control by insisting on exclusive worship, punishes individuals disproportionately, such as killing children to punish Pharaoh, and creates severe loyalty tests, like ordering Abraham to sacrifice his son. This behavior is concerning. In the Bible, the devil does not kill anyone, while God has a significant number of deaths attributed to him. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.